Okay, welcome to the WPIAL Blitz Show. This is playoff recap week one. My name's Bruce Badgley. Alongside me, Mr. Statistics and Mr. Graphics there, Ian McMeans. And Ian, we've got a very special guest for our program this week.
We do. We have head coach of the Deer Lakes Lancers, Tim Burk. Deer Lakes won their first playoff game in school history. Congratulations, Coach Burk, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit before the show that you've coached in some respects at Deer Lakes for almost 15 years, give or take over time. So, what does this playoff win mean for the team, the school, the community, all that?
Oh, it's exciting. Just to see the community come out in full support. They did it when the basketball made their run last winter time, and to see them to come right back out and do it again, it's awesome. It's magical, and to be able to say you're the first group that got that win is something that'll last a lifetime.
Yeah, and when you have kind of these transcendent moments, from your team, how do they feel? I'm being the first one in school history. There must be an awful lot of pride, especially with your senior class in bringing home that first win, right?
Sure. Our senior class isn't big, and I think sometimes that's a misconception. Everybody says, "Oh, they're senior loaded." We only have 8 seniors, and I keep telling people the cupboard isn't bare. Yes, we have some key guys in key spots, but 4 out of the 5 linemen are coming back, and they're still young. They're sophomores. It's a great, and the future is bright here. It's been a work in progress, and the kids are so well deserving. It's been a long time coming. A lot of former alumni have reached out and said that they wish that they've been a part of it, and a lot have actually reached out and said they felt like they're the building block of this. So, for the program's sake and the kids' sake, they're so excited. They realize they wrote history in terms of our school, and they're happy to be a part of it.
So, did you feel like, last year you made the playoffs for, I think it was just the third time in school history. Did you feel like coming into this season that this was sort of the natural next step and that you had a shot at this conquering the hurdle of winning your first playoff game?
Yeah, and then I think that I can't remember who else I told this story to, but last year, being a part of 2010, which was the very first playoff year under Hazlett, and then doing it again in 2015. It was big lights, camera, action. Cameras everywhere because it was such a big ordeal. And I kept telling my kids, if you get there, people will come and will relish in this. It's just awesome. And we were 4-6. We got in. We did our job. There wasn't a whole lot of lights, camera, action for it. And my kids this year, I was kind of like, listen, last year was like a fluke. They kind of made a liar out of me. But at the end of the day, this year it was a spectacle last Friday. The kids loved it. They talked about all week, and then after Saturday morning when we brought them in for films, it's all they were talking about. So I think last year did help us in so many ways, and the kids just performed, man. They were awesome and so cool and level headed. It was just great to see for the kids.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things for me, and I'm sitting at home with my kids, kind of following things on Twitter, watching scores come in and all that, was just how after the game, like the team went over and celebrated with the cheerleaders and the band, and it was really like the whole community had come together for this moment.
And that's it. And it's sort of a thing we've started the past couple of years. When we do win, one of the things that is important to me is the cheerleaders have just as big a part in this. They show up every Friday, the band shows up every Friday, and the student body shows up every Friday. And we're one student body, we're one organization. So go celebrate with them. They had a big enough hand in it as our football players. So it's a group effort, and at the end of the day, they're all classmates. So go celebrate with them. And it's one thing our seniors usually try to hold kids back, so to speak, was we get through the handshake line. But then once everybody's through, we tell them, go spend some time with your classmates. And it's kind of developed into a little thing, and they seem to like it.
How does the personality of how has the personality of your team changed now that clearly you've got winning expectations there?
Well, and that's one of those things that took time to build. You had to learn how to win, which was difficult at times, and we had a lot of heartbreaking games over the past couple years. And they just developed like this is what we have to do. We have to find a way to get over that hump, and they did. And once they did, it just started to snowball. And now again, yeah, we've talked about it. Next year the expectations are going to be to win, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, and um, I think our kids are going to kind of cherish that and really this off season that's coming up, really just get after it because they know the bar is set high. And I think our group of seniors, have really instilled in the freshmen and sophomores that this is what it takes to get there. And so now that they don't know any better, right? They don't know bad habits or old things or bad culture. This is what that young group knows. So again, that cupboard is not bare. We plan on having some success for a couple years, if not longer, and see where she leads us.
So you mentioned about the run the basketball team went on last year. Last season when Union went on their sort of magical run to win the 1A championship and all the way to the state title game, we talked to some folks from the Lawrence County Sports Network, and they talked about how the core group of kids at Union had been to, the WPIAL championship game in basketball. They'd been there. They'd made a run in baseball. So like once they got there in football, they had already experienced that playoff atmosphere, that championship atmosphere. Did you see something similar with your kids that, the basketball kind of set up that the lights weren't too bright for them? They kind of knew what to expect going into it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that we all the soccer program is so good at Deer Lakes. Winning it becomes almost contagious, and everybody wants to be a part of it, and it really set the tone. And last year was with Coach Fletcher and what he did with that magical run. I think we at the end of the day, if I'm not mistaken, I think we have seven kids or six kids that played basketball for them. It was unbelievable, and they knew that it was hard work and it wasn't going to be easy, and they went against teams that people wrote them off against. But they rose above it and found a way to get the job done. And so now I truly believe it's spilled over. Because again, we went through a little section here where we were giving up a touchdown on our first possession. And then we find a way to get back into the game and shut that down. But I would, when they would score, I would go out onto the field and be like, guys, we're okay. And they would almost get annoyed with me. Like, yeah, we got it. We know we're okay. And that's just maturity and leadership and kind of that been there, done that type of thing. You can't teach it. It's one of those things you got to experience. And, it's really paid off for us. And the basketball's been a blessing. It just kind of snowballed through the whole district. So it's been great.
Nice. So how special was it for you personally to have, your son be the quarterback of the team that, won the first playoff game in school history? I had to ask the question.
What's that?
I said I had to ask the question.
Yeah, it's a common question. At the end of the day, it's been an experience. It's been an honor. Not many people get that opportunity. And I'll be the first to say, when I first got into coaching in 2009, Derek was 4. And I never imagined in a million years, it wasn't my plan. So, oh gosh, when he's in high school, I can hopefully be the head coach here and hopefully I'll get to coach him. And it was never like that. It just got to that point. But in the same breath, it's been unbelievable. He's again the most unselfish kid. You read any of the articles, he credits everybody else. It's been a true pleasure and an opportunity of a lifetime. And for him to have his name written in stone like that is something he should be proud of. It's something that we as a family are proud of. But it's been a tough road for him, and only he knows what he's been through. And he's kept quiet about it, and just decided to work harder. And credit to that kid because he turned a blind eye and a deaf ear and just worked. And the proof is in the pudding at this point. And we're happy for him.
So many times teams there's only so much emotion, that is in a team. Okay, you go and you try and you strive, and sometimes you spend too much emotion to achieve, that goal. How are you kind of guarding against that, with your players, that they haven't, expelled so much of this emotion to just achieve the goal of winning one playoff game. How do you keep that emotion and how do you keep that level high for these guys to win another game and another game, kind of like Union did last year?
Yeah, we've been preaching that over the weekend. We preached it to him today. You're never as good as you think you are, and you're never as bad as you think you are either. So there's been mistakes, there's been issues along the way, but we've been able to correct them, and the kids understand it. Again, the maturation of this group. I actually had one of the sophomores come up to us, and it was probably about week 3, I believe, and said, this has been one of the closest knit teams that he's ever been a part of. And right then and there, after he walked out of our coach's office, I looked around. I'm like, we're getting it done. Like our culture has changed, it's shifted, and it's the kids. We guide them at this point, and we obviously we do the X's and O's. But when you got talent and you got great leadership, everything's easy. They handle themselves. They handle little problems internally. We don't have to correct those things, and it's just been great. But for them to not get too high or not too low, again, I think it's the experience of been there, done that. And we talked this week, like we're going, quote unquote, the beach, right? Like, we can't worry about that. At the end of the day, it's a game. And you can't get caught up in the different colored turf. Just play. And I think I've been harping on that for 6 years now. And one of the other moments that I think was key is, we've been playing in front of some larger crowds at home. So when we come out, I tell them, guys, you run out, look at the crowd. You got about 15 seconds, take it all in, embrace it. But then a big deep breath, let it go. And then it's just a game. And it's no different than any other game that we're playing. The kids go to class just like you do. They go to work just like you do. There's nothing different. And it's been to seem very positive for our kids.
Nice. Nice. So one other thing before we let you go that we like to do on this show when we have guests on, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but we like to try and give shout outs to the unsung heroes because it's really easy to find stats for the quarterbacks, the running backs, all that, but really in the trenches is where it happens. So if you want to take a minute, give a shout out to your offensive and defensive linemen, because we know that's where the sausage really gets made and it all really comes together.
Oh, absolutely. And when you got guys like Joey, I'll go left to right, right? Like the Nick Rossi's of the world, again, a senior that's really just been a crazy story in itself. I don't want to take up too much time, but this
No,
kid,
tell the story. Let everybody know.
this kid's something unreal. Like he came to me in 8th grade. He's always been a baseball kid. 2 games left in middle school. He says to me, he's like, I think I want to play. You can join at any time. I don't care. Just come. Maybe you may like it. So he comes out, he plays. 9th grade, he quits. He's like, I'm going to stick to baseball. Okay, that's fine. Comes back his sophomore year, says, I'm going to play football, but I'm going to play this travel baseball too. And so I'm going to miss a couple games my sophomore year. Well, okay, well, we'll get you back. And then his junior year just took off. And now his senior year is doing the same stuff, being recruited, by everybody in the PSAC. And now he realizes he's not a baseball kid too, by the way. But just a phenomenal story. Proof that if you work hard, you can get to where you want to be. So Nick Rossi is a great story, and then the rest of them are so young and just so light years ahead of where we ever expect them to be. Which is Joey Ashe, a sophomore, Lee Hengelsberg at center as a junior, Sean Beer, the right guard, a sophomore, and then Aiden McCurdy, our right tackle, again another sophomore. This group is unbelievable. They work hard. Not to mention that Joey Ashe's 6'1", probably 250. Lee's the same way. He's about 6'1", 6 foot, right around that 250. Sean Beer, I believe, is 6'1", 6'2", around that 280. And then Aiden McCurdy's almost 6'4" now, and he's rolling into that 240 mark. Again, these guys are just like babies still, and they're probably the hardest working group in the weight room. Only time will tell how much further those guys are going to push. And as you said, when you got the hogs up front, life becomes easy. You can run whatever you want, and you look pretty good when you draw it up. But it starts with them, and gosh, they're maturing in front of our eyes, and it's been an honor to coach those guys, and I can't wait to see what the future holds.
Well,
That's
I tell
awesome.
you what, the rest of the WPIAL is like quaking in their boots listening to the fact that you got all these young offensive linemen that are already getting you, into the tournament and a win, and you still got 2 and 3 years of these guys, and that cohesiveness of playing together like that, that's invaluable, right, Tim?
It's extremely invaluable. You can't. There's nothing you can do to teach it. People are like, "Well, how? What do you do this?" Nothing. Like they've got to figure it out on their own, and they have. And you go back and forth. Was it a senior leadership? Yes, but it's also just again the culture's changed, and they don't know any different, and that's a good thing. These guys they just know they have to work, and if you want to be successful in life, you're gonna have to work, and nothing will be handed to us. And we're Deer Lakes. Nobody has ever handed us anything, and that's okay. But go take it, and if you work hard in the off season, and good things will come to you. And again, a lot of these guys, I told you that cupboard isn't bare. A lot like the running, like Zaire Williams is only a junior. Zach Grant, he's had gosh, I want to say the last 2 games, he's probably had 6 or 7 touchdowns the last 2 games, 3 games. Just coming out of the shell, he's a junior. Again, Nathaniel Moore, again another wide receiver who's 6'4". Again, another junior, right? Like the cupboard isn't bare,
Wow.
and it's good to know that things are looking up, and we'll see what happens the next couple of years.
Oh, we can sure tell with the excitement in your voice that
Yeah,
you're pretty happy man right now. And I'll tell you what, it's been a pleasure to me. It's been a pleasure to share, the stories of Deer Lakes and how this group of players not only is done well this year, but sure sounds like you've got some makings for a couple 3 years here and some building for beyond maybe the WPIAL there.
well, we'll see. Only time will tell, and but we are excited, and our community should be excited because the program is definitely trending up. Um, but things change quickly. But we are excited. The coaching staff's ecstatic, and just so proud of the kids. They're world class kids, and I always feel so bad for some of them because I don't feel like they always get the recognition that they should. But again, with what's going on this year, a lot of kids are now finally they deserve it. They're like every other kid. They deserve all the attention that they can get, and we couldn't be happier for them.
Well, Coach
That's
Tim
great.
Burke, listen, thank you very much for your time this evening. Obviously, your best part about doing the show, on Monday is that you're not really frothing at the mouth yet, for your opponent upcoming this Friday. So nice smile on the face there, but I'm sure pretty soon the game face will be on, and we wish you all the luck in the world, Tim.
Appreciate that, and thank you for inviting me on.
All
I
right.
love the
Thanks a lot.
opportunity.
Just go ahead and exit out, and Ian and I will continue with the show. Take care.
Thank you. You guys have a good evening.
All right,
Thanks,
we
you too.
will.
Thanks for
Thank
joining us.
you.
Good luck this
Thank
week.
you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, that was great. I'm like ready to run through a wall now. Like I want to go play for him.
I mean, my God, look at the core group
Yeah.
that Coach has. Such a young talent there. Um, and I'm just trying to
And I
type.
keep thinking about like how well like what he's talking about parallels with so many of the other things we've talked about over time that when we had James Dotson from the Lawrence County Sports Network on earlier this year talking about the Mohawk Neshannock game, right? And he was talking about how Neshannock, who wound up winning the 2A Midwestern Conference title and getting the number 2 seed in the 2A playoffs, they lost like all their skill position players last year from a team that went to the semifinals, and they lost them all to graduation, but they brought back their whole offensive line, and that was what they wanted to build around. And now they're the number 2 seed in the 2A playoffs because they had that consistency up front and were able to build around that offensive line and find new skill position players. But Coach Burke, not only do they have the line coming back, but they've got the skill position. I mean, some of those sizes for like 6'4" for a wide receiver in high school, like that's insane.
Well, in the size school too.
Yeah.
You're talking about a depth of talent at a lower classification school, which is, I mean, what a benefit that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And especially I didn't want to get into it too much with him, but we've started to hear word about the new enrollments and the new classifications. Obviously, everything hasn't been publicly posted yet, but some schools have said, oh, this is what our enrollment figure was, so this is where we're going to be. And one of those was Bell Vernon said, oh, we're going to be in 4A next year. So Bell Vernon, being the defending 3A state champs, obviously is the number one ranked 3A team in the state right now too, who Deer Lakes plays this week, but next year they'll be up in 4A. So, the window is certainly open for someone else to come in and kind of grab the bull by the horns in 3A next season. And it's really exciting to see where this Deer Lakes program is going, especially considering, what it was 13 years ago. They made the playoffs for the first time ever in 2010. And we talk a lot on the show about how different schools have different definitions of success, right? That, regardless of what happens this week against Bell Vernon, this is going to be seen as the most successful season in school history. This is going to be seen as that record-setting group. So this is an awesome accomplishment for Deer Lakes, and it's going to be really cool to see how they take that next step in program building moving forward into the future.
I could just hear Coach Burk with like one of those Gene Hackman moments, from Hoosiers. I don't care what the score is out there. If you give your, all and whatever like that, you guys are going to be winners. And that's kind of the thing there. I think realistically, obviously they, have a tough road to hoe. But anyway, Ian, you've got control, and we've got people, chatting it up here tonight. Thank you very much. That's why we do it live here, so we can interact with our fans. So thank you very much, and off we go here, Ian.
All right. Yes. So this is the quarterfinals edition of the WPIAL Blitz Show. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you're watching us, you obviously know where to find us on YouTube. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, our rarely used Instagram account, and check out all of my WPIAL content on steelcityblitz.com. Last week I did preview all 27 of the games that were happening. So this week I'll probably have a preview post up of the games of the week that talks about all the games happening this week as well.
You're probably thinking I've got a life this week. I've only had 14 games to preview.
There's 20 this week because of buys, okay, but nevertheless, or maybe 22, whatever it is. It's not too bad. All right, so congratulations to Deer Lakes on snapping their playoff victory, I guess drought you could say, but they never won a game in school history. The only other one that had a long playoff drought that has won a game in the past was Kiski, who hasn't won a playoff game since 1990, but they fell to Thomas Jefferson. The one thing I forgot to ask Coach Burk was how cold was the Gatorade, because I put this picture of him getting the Gatorade dumped on him, and I forgot to ask him how cold the Gatorade was on a chilly Friday night. But congratulations to Deer Lakes once again on snapping.
I'm sure he didn't even feel
it. Yeah, probably not. There's probably so much emotion and adrenaline at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So by conference, the 5A Northeast Conference, which only got 2 teams in this year, Penn Hills and Pine Richland, they both won their games. The 4A Big 7 Conference, for the second year in a row, went unbeaten in the first round. TJ, Latrobe, and Trinity all won, and McKeesport got a bye. So all 4 of the 4A Big 7 teams are on to the quarterfinals there. And in 3A, the Western Hills Conference also went unbeaten in the first round. One of those was a pretty big upset with South Park, the 12 seed, upending Knock, the 5 seed. So congratulations to those 3 conferences going unbeaten. For the second year in a row, the 5A Big East Conference went completely winless in the opening round, and the 3A Interstate Conference went 0-2. But Bell Vernon and Elizabeth Forward did get buys there. So, they still have 2 teams alive because of those 2 buys. But nevertheless, the second straight year, the 4A Big 7, this was one that we had talked about a few weeks ago. I remember saying, that looking at those teams, I felt like they were all good enough to get to the quarterfinals, that Latrobe and Trinity and TJ and McKeesport were all good enough to be there. And we saw it happen, that all 4 of them got through. And I think even last week on the show, I mentioned that I thought Latrobe and Trinity were a little bit underseeded for how good I thought they were. And I guess they proved me right by both beating their first round opponents.
Yeah. It's very, I find that very interesting that in consecutive years that, the conferences basically either are undefeated and others are winless. That's just, I don't know. Sometimes that is not a coincidence. Obviously, and those are things I think that, the WPIAL probably will take in consideration when they, redraw this thing in the upcoming months.
In theory, somewhat. I'll say, conferences are mostly regionally and geographically aligned. So they probably won't, it really depends on what classifications teams land in. But I think the one thing that is worth considering, you know, is they do tend to take into account some marginal historic performance when they seed the brackets, that usually if the defending champions go undefeated, that they tend to get the number one seed. So that may come into consideration when they do some future bracketing as well. All right, our Go MVP player of the week this week is
Wow.
Braylon Thomas, quarterback for Union. 7 total touchdowns and 270 yards of total offense. Union defeated Burgettstown for the second year in a row in the first round of the playoffs. This year it was a 51-37 margin. And I think if I can do this right, we have some highlights as well
Oh,
from
here we go again.
from Braylon Thomas's 7 touchdown performance.
I think that there's a setting that I can put on this thing here to make it a little bit less, you know, um, to you it probably looks like it's smooth. When we watch it on our end, it gets a little jumpy. So I've got to do a little work on my end to improve that. But these highlights are just incredible of how, these players are just letting it fly.
Yep. And the other thing, Braylon, I mean, he was our 1A player of the year last year, and he was really the key to Union's run all the way to the state championship game. He just looks a step faster than everybody else on the field every time he plays. And he's got a nice arm, but he's so elusive and can just do things with the ball in his hands that you just don't see players at the 1A level doing very often.
Yeah, pretty special, when you see him in person too. I can tell you that. But
Yeah. Yeah. He definitely looks like a kid that should be playing somewhere at the next level.
boy,
Oh,
everybody, I tell you what, we're really chatting it up out there this
good.
week. Thanks to Mike Lowe, man, chatting it up with us here on the Blitz Show.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining us. So, yes, congratulations to Braylon Thomas from Union. I think this is actually the second time this year he's won our Player of the Week award. But when you put up 7 touchdowns in a playoff game, then you deserve to be the Player of the Week. Some other top performers: Julian Duggar from Penn Hills had 5 total touchdowns. Eric DeRue from South Park, 4 touchdowns in an upset over 5th-seeded Knock. Nolan DeLucia, the quarterback from Peters Township, also had 5 total touchdowns. Spencer Petruzzi from California had 4 total touchdowns, 3 on the ground and a kickoff return. Derek Burk from Deer Lakes, in their school's first playoff win in school history, had 3 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. And then I think this one's noteworthy too, as we're going to get into some of the conversations about playoff matchups here. In 5A, both Moon and Pine Richland have gone to this Wildcat offense with Josh Bladel for Moon and Ethan Pillar for Pine Richland, basically just handling the ball every snap. And it's paid off big time for both of them. Josh Bladel had 3 touchdowns in their win over Gateway, and Ethan Pillar had 4 touchdowns in Pine Richland's victory over Bethel Park. So it's
Wow.
something to watch as we move forward into the playoffs, of how those Wildcat offenses, being a little bit of a throwback to an elder day of football, are still working in 2023.
That's the beauty about the high school game, is that a team can build around their strength regardless of what it is, whether it's a running game like that, or just flipping it all over the yard, or what have you. That's what I love about high school football, is that you can build around a system, you can build around a player, you can build around a group of players, and that's what's special about what these teams are doing, is they realize, and the coaches too, they realize what their strengths are, and they play to their strengths, and they play very well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes it a little more difficult to stop, Pine Richland has an offensive lineman, Ryan Corey, who's committed to Wisconsin. So when you have a tackle that's going to Wisconsin that you can run behind, that makes a little bit of a difference. But I think one of the other things too is that when you go with this Wildcat and put, your best running back just taking the snap and running with it, you can put an extra blocker in there too, and that just changes the calculus of
well,
who
you
does the
can't account
defense
for
have to
that
go
player.
after. Yeah,
You can't account for that player on defense.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that's also, somewhat why some of these dual threat quarterbacks have been so successful running the ball too, is that it's just that extra body that you have to account for.
Clearly. And go MVB, if you've been watching the broadcast all year, we've talked about go MVB and what it can do for players. There's so much competition out there, and it's obviously competition on the field week in, week out to play football, but then there's competition if you want to play football at the next level. And you're not only competing against the guys in high school, but you're competing against guys in college, the transfer portal. Try and level the playing field for yourself, okay? Get involved with Go MVB. They're a public relations firm that specializes in athletes. They'll put together a great profile for you that makes it easy for college coaches to find you. College coaches will find you much easier because Go MVB is connected to so many college coaches. 85% of Go MVB users get college offers. That's for a reason. Just go there. All we talk about all the time is just go to Go MVB, look at their Twitter feed, look at their Instagram page. I mean, you will want to be one of those athletes that Go MVB is promoting. So go to gomvb.com/SSM special. We've got some specials here with the Blitz show. gomvb.com/SSM special. Right, Ian?
Yep. And this is getting into that time of year where, as the college season starts to wind down, players in college start to enter the transfer portal. So there's even more competition for those roster spots as coaches are starting to look to build their teams for the future years, at the college level. And really the other thing too, that the transfer portal is kind of created is not only at the Division I level, there's a lot of movement, but at the other levels too, that you've got players at the Division I level who, for one reason or another, are looking to move back closer to home or just couldn't quite fit in at the D1 level and are looking at some of the FCS or D2 levels now. There's a lot of competition for these spots, and I think having a good social media presence is one that really helps set high school kids apart, especially now that we've seen this year, especially major colleges throwing out scholarship offers to freshmen. And you might not think about like, oh, I'm just a freshman, what's it matter? But like, we've seen a number of freshmen get offers from Pitt and Penn State here in the WPIAL already this year. And that's kind of incredible that they're throwing out offers to freshmen already, but it's happening. And these coaches are looking for kids at any level.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So go MVB, check them out.
All right. So we're going to talk playoffs now. The little sponsor segment there is usually our segue between what just happened and what's going to happen. So this week in 5A and 6A, we have the semifinals. So we'll break those down first before we get into the quarterfinals in the other four classifications. So the 6A teams all had last week off. Now they play in the semifinals in games that are all rematches of ones that have already happened this year. And actually, these games are rematches of the playoff games that happened last year as well. They were seeded differently, but they still aligned into the same matchups. So we'll see if we get the same results this year. The first one, North Allegheny against Cannon McMillan. This is the 2 seed against the 3 seed this year. North Allegheny won 30-6 earlier this season. NA's won all 4 playoff meetings with Cannon Mac. It's their 8th straight semifinal appearance. Last year, technically, was Cannon Mac's first ever semifinal appearance. And yeah, North Allegheny is not only loaded once again, bringing back most of their team that won the WPIAL championship last year, but I think pretty much since they lost that game to Central Catholic earlier this year, their whole focus has pretty much been on how do we prepare to play Central Catholic again in the WPIAL championship game. So this is a team on a mission looking to get back. And I think losing that game earlier this year really lit a fire under them. And I mean, NA's been scoring all over the place. They've been playing really good defense, and they're just a juggernaut right now.
Well, Canamac's going to have to do something, out of the ordinary. They're going to have to bring from the bottom of the playbook. They're going to have to, maybe throw a couple onside kicks in there unexpectedly. Clearly, they're going to have to do something to win this game and take it away from North Allegheny, because North Allegheny has just been a juggernaut.
They have been. And I will say last year when they met in the playoffs, it was a 7-0 game, but they played that game in basically a hurricane. Like, it was a torrential downpour. Weather was a significant factor. And the weather for this Friday night looks pretty good. So I don't think Cannon Mac's going to have the weather on their side this time to slow down North Allegheny's offense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Weather for this Friday is 51 and partly cloudy, which is perfect. Perfect Friday night football weather.
What you would expect in November.
Yep, exactly. So the other semifinal is also a rematch of last year's semifinal, which Central Catholic beat Mount Lebanon last year. And prior to that, Mount Lebanon had beat Central Catholic in the 2021 championship game. So a little bit of revenge there. This will be the fifth straight year that these two teams meet in the playoffs, which is kind of hard to believe, but in a limited 6A field, it's not as hard to believe. I got Central Catholic's record completely wrong here.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Yeah, that was a holdover from a copy paste error there. That should be a 9-1 overall and 4-0 in conference. So ignore that there.
Yeah.
But all the rest of the information here is correct. Central has made the last 4 championship games. It's their 10th semifinal in the last 11 years. And their points per game numbers are correct, that they have been the highest scoring team and best defensive team in 6A. So we will just ignore those records that Ian didn't update and move on. So looking at the statewide brackets here, the WPIAL kind of slots in right over here on the left-hand side. And this is technically the round of 32 statewide. So in pretty much every classification, there's a couple small exceptions here and there, but in pretty much every classification, we have full brackets from here on out. Like I said, with a couple small exceptions, but really in 6A, the huge districts towards the eastern part of the state, District 1 outside of Philadelphia, District 3 out your way, and then the District 12 Philadelphia schools are really the ones that kind of dominate the bracket. And the WPIAL slots in right here with the WPIAL champion entering at the state quarterfinal level, where they will play either Erie McDowell, who now gets a bye, or either State College or Altoona, who play this week. So the winner out of that will play the WPIAL champion here in the quarterfinals before they move on to then play whoever comes out of District 3. So I also threw in here my WPIAL Blitz rankings, which we've been talking about for the last few weeks alongside. So Penn Live's rankings don't come out until Tuesday morning, and we record the show on Monday night. So I went with last week's rankings, which were prior to the playoffs. But for the most part, I have the same top 10 teams in my statistical-based rankings as Penn Live does in their human-based rankings, just in slightly different order. But did you have any noteworthy results that you saw in 6A from the first round of the playoffs that happened?
Well, not really. I think it was very much chalk. On the eastern side of the bracket, as was in the WPIAL District 3 6A tournament really doesn't start till this weekend. So Manheim Township, who was number 1 in the Blitz rankings, was off, along with Harrisburg. St. Joe Prep, they're going to be playing the District 12 championship this week. Actually, not District 12, but the Philadelphia Catholic League Championship against Roman Catholic, which is
I think they play LaSalle. Roman's playing
Oh, that's
MSU.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's right. LaSalle
Yeah.
played Father Judge last week, and so yeah, that's going to be a very interesting game there in the Philadelphia Catholic League. But um, you know, the tournament kind of starts on the statewide level with a whimper. There are so many good teams that were on bye last week across the state. It was really hard to gauge, how the tournament is going. Really, only District One just starts flying out of the box. But then again, you're talking about 1 versus 16, and yada yada yada. I did an 8-9 game in 5A in District 3 last week. Pretty tremendous game where Hershey came back from 21-0 down at halftime to beat Exeter Township, which was a really fabulous game there too. So not so much really on the 6A side, first week technically here.
Yeah, and I feel like this week that we're getting into is really kind of the start of the state bracket.
Yeah,
Because the first week is kind of those first round play-in games in some respects, and yeah, this is really where we start to get into the meat of it. So I did beef up my statewide rankings chart here. Since you enjoyed seeing how things changed last week, I figured I would also kind of highlight, who won, who lost, and then what games were coming up here, and where those teams were ranked. So the big change overall was Parkland moving up in my rankings.
mm-hmm.
But I think really what did it from the statistical standpoint was Parkland played a game, and the teams they moved up above, St. Joe's Prep and Harrisburg had bye weeks. So I think when I started to dig into the data, that's what made the difference in
Sure.
Parkland making that statistical jump up the rankings. Not necessarily anything to denigrate those other teams. Springford did drop out of my rankings and Nazareth moved up, but I think that's because my rankings also include that margin of victory metric. So
Yeah,
Springford beat North Penn by 7, whereas Nazareth smoked Wilkes-Barre. So I think that's what slid Nazareth above Springford as well. But overall, of the 17 first round games that happened in 6A statewide, my rankings were 13-4 at predicting the winners. So that's pretty good.
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah. They were 80% overall at predicting winners. And they've been, since I started doing it statewide, they've been right around 80% every week. So,
See, I mean,
yeah.
you're, the secret's out, man. I mean, you gotta follow Ian.
Yeah. I'm just, yeah.
You just
So looking at these matchups too, the teams that are ranked in my top 10, um, none of them, I guess the closest one would be Downingtown East playing Perkiomen Valley, who's 15th in my 6A rankings. So,
Yeah.
I show the top 10 on the show, but I have them all in my spreadsheet. So,
Sure, exactly. Everybody's got a ranking, all
yeah,
from 1 to 435, whatever
yeah,
teams we've got in Pennsylvania.
I think it's 554 actually, but
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
So
Well,
yes, so
okay.
I have them. I could give them all a ranking. But and I will say these rankings are just within the 6A classification, so they're
Yeah,
not
right,
the overall. But I do have
right.
the overall ones too. All right, on to 5A. So back to the WPIAL, where the 5A playoffs did kick out in full force. Peters Township thumping Franklin Regional like they've done to pretty much everyone they've played all year. Moon squeaking past Gateway. Moon intercepted a pass in the end zone, somewhat controversially. The play before that, Gateway's quarterback Brad Birch had run it in for a touchdown.
Oh,
But there was a holding penalty that was called, so Gateway got set back, and then Moon intercepted the pass on the next play to seal the victory. So Moon will move on, and Gateway will go home for the second year in a row, losing in the 4-5 matchup. Penn Hills pounded Penn Trafford. Julian Duggar with those 5 total touchdowns, the Pitt commit from Penn Hills. And then Pine Richland also with the big win, Ethan Pillar with 4 touchdowns to set up a rematch between Penn Hills and Pine Richland in one of the semifinals. And then another conference rematch, Peters Township against Moon in the other semifinal. So let's talk about those in depth since they are semifinal matchups. Peters beat Moon 40-7 earlier this year, but Moon has changed their offense up a little bit since that prior meeting. They've gone to that Wildcat with Josh Bladel running the ball. So the this is a little bit different of a Moon attack that Peters will see this week, but Peters has been so good on defense.
Oh
I mean,
my God, they're
basically
just they're tremendous.
6 points per game they've allowed, and their defense is scoring points too with interception returns and fumble recoveries and all that. That Peters is on a mission right now, and I think they're a team that they missed the playoffs last year. They lost in the championship game in 2019 and 2020, and they've really got themselves with that focus of trying to claim that first WPIAL championship in school history. And I think Peters is on a mission this year. The other thing I will say, potentially, as we go back to the bracket, we talked earlier about how both Moon and Pine Richland have gone to those Wildcat offenses. So now Peters seeing Moon in the semifinal and being able to prepare for a Wildcat. If Pine Richland beats Penn Hills, potentially, that sets Peters up to having seen and game planned for this, a week in advance already. That a lot of teams, it's hard to game plan for a Wildcat because you just don't know what to expect. But Peters seeing it against Moon, I think if they have to play Pine Richland in the title game, could potentially help them.
And it's hard to develop, to scout a team like that too, because they're still in the midst of, creating tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now they may run from the same formation, but that's the benefit of running from the Wildcat is that you're running virtually just about every play you run from the same formation. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you develop tendencies for the defense? Well, probably only through like offensive line blocking schemes, not typically how where the guys are going to run. But that's the tough part about that offense. And as I said, switching mid-season, you don't really have a full year of film to take a look at to develop those trends. So definitely a weapon there by changing to that Wildcat.
Yep, absolutely. But I do think overall, Peter seeing a Moon team here in the semifinals that runs the Wildcat potentially sets them up well to defend it against Pine Richland. Obviously, you can know what the scheme is and know how to stop it, but actually going out there and tackling the guy's a different story
Yeah,
because
correct.
Ethan
Exactly
Pillar's
right.
like a freight train to try and tackle.
Yeah.
So speaking of Pine Richland, they lost their early season matchup against Penn Hills 26-20. Julian Duggar had 4 touchdowns in that game for Penn Hills. But it's going to be interesting to see now that, Pine Richland has gone to the Wildcat because they were still running I'll say, more normal offense the first time these teams met. So we'll see if the Wildcat changes the calculus here in this matchup between conference rivals that have met already this year. And both of these teams, this is the John Ladon Bowl, right? Coach Ladon won the state championship at Penn Hills in 2018. Last year went to Pine Richland, won the WPIAL and state championship there, but he has yet to beat his former school as head coach of Pine Richland. Penn Hills beat Pine Richland last year in the regular season. They beat them this year in the regular season. And in games like this, having a kid who is, a major conference D1 recruit like Julian Duggar at Penn Hills at quarterback can be an absolute game changer. I think this is going to be a classic game for the
Wow.
ages. These teams, they know each other. They know each other's tendencies. There's a lot of history there between them with Coach Ladon, recent history, but they've faced each other a few times too. So yeah, I think I think we're set up for a good one here.
Yeah, clearly. And the pedigree of winning at Pine Richland is so impressive. Recent memory. And so many of these guys that are playing on this team are trying to create their legacy at Pine Richland. And say what you want, there's a lot of pressure on guys to follow, to not be that class that lets the legacy get tarnished at all. So a lot of pressure there, regardless of the coach um, at Pine Richland to perform in the postseason. I just want to take a moment and thank everybody out there who's been giving us the kind words through the chat here, Ian. And probably we've been chatting it up pretty good, as good as we have all year. So thanks everybody for being involved in the program. Like I said, that's the reason we do the show live, is so that we can interact with our fans, and we really appreciate all of our fans out there.
Yeah, and if anyone in the chat has any questions,
Yeah.
feel free to throw them out to us. We're working our way through, classification by classification here. But if people have questions when we get to the classification they care about, definitely feel free to throw them out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so moving on to the statewide level now, the WPIAL here on the left side of the bracket. Once again, we're over here in the bottom left quadrant. The WPIAL champion enters the state bracket at the quarterfinal level once again. This is one of those weird bye situations where they'll play the winner between Hollidaysburg and Cathedral Prep. So Cathedral Prep doesn't get a bye all the way to the quarterfinals this year. They do actually have to play Hollidaysburg. So they have to play one game to get to the quarterfinals. Whereas it's going to be an absolute slugfest to get through the WPIAL. But that's kind of what's looming there in a potential quarterfinal matchup. And then on the rest of the bracket, the top half of the left side is District 3, which is, I know, your neck of the woods, Bruce. And then we've got, the behemoth of District 1, all those teams out from
Yeah.
the Philly suburb area, and then District 12, where we have, I think, Imhotep's playing. Actually, it's on the next slide, right? Imhotep's, no, they're playing Martin Luther King this week. But there's a potential matchup with Roman Catholic in a few weeks, I think, there.
Yeah, absolutely. And out of District 1, I saw Westchester Ruston play earlier this year. They played on a Thursday night. I specifically went down to see them play. That's a really good team. There's so many good teams in 5A. God, between Peters Township and then Imhotep Charter and Roman Catholic and Westchester Ruston and Cocalico here out of District 3, just incredible stuff. And I think Imhotep Charter, they've just got such a burden on their back, having gotten to 2 consecutive state championship games and losing, to get back to try and win it. I can't tell you, the amount of pressure that's really on that team. And I think a lot of it is self-inflicted pressure. I think that those guys like to just go out there and play. They're enormously talented, but I don't think that you can discount the fact that there is a lot of pressure on that team, more so on any high school team in recent memory for me, to make it to the state championship game and win.
Yeah, and Imhotep only has one championship in their school history, right? They've been
Right,
to a bunch of
exactly.
finals,
Everybody
but
talks about this dynasty of Imhotep, but therein lies the issue, is that they've had all these high expectations, they've made all these championship games, yet only have one to show for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So looking at my WPIAL Blitz 5A statewide rankings, Peters Township and Moon, Imhotep, and Martin Luther King. Imhotep did slide above Pine Richland this week in my rankings just by, a couple points. But I think that was probably because they beat a team that was ranked higher than where Pine Richland was,
Yeah.
Where Bethel Park was. But nevertheless, not many changes here. But I think, for me, at least, being somewhat selfish, in the 24 games that happened, the teams ranked higher by my mathematical rankings were 23-1. So my rankings did very well in 5A this week. So we'll see. But the big one here for me is obviously Pine Richland against Penn Hills, to see, who comes out of that one and gets to the WPIAL championship game, because as of right now, they are both ranked in the top 4 by my rankings.
Yeah, that's really crazy. And that's really crazy about Upper St. Clair, who's your number 9 team, didn't even qualify for the postseason. That's just,
And
but
if
look,
people would like a detailed breakdown of that, check out our show from last week where I went through all the reasons why.
Oh my
and
God,
what could be done about it. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That will live in infamy.
Yeah. Okay, on to 4A. The top 3 teams in the 4A playoffs got byes. So there were 5 games that happened here. Wait, no. Yeah, 5 games. I can count. I'm fighting off a cold. It's been a week.
It has been.
Yeah. All right. So Latrobe thumped West Allegheny. Latrobe last year won their first playoff game since 1968 when they beat Highlands in overtime. This year, they definitively beat West Allegheny. So the Wildcats taking another big step forward. Their dual threat quarterback, John Wetzel, ran for 244 yards and 4 touchdowns. Latrobe's got a very nice, well-rounded team. Obviously, they play a outstanding Aliquippa team this week, but Latrobe is looking strong and is a program trending in the right direction after they had kind of been down for a number of years. Mars beating Chartiers Valley, getting their first playoff win since 2015. Central Valley beats Highlands. Trinity beating North Catholic. Nice for Trinity. They get their first playoff win since 2007. We interviewed their head coach a couple weeks ago on the show, Dan Knaus. He was another really good interview. So cool to see Trinity getting that win, even though it was over my alma mater, which if you go back to last week's show, I believe I said that North Catholic was overseeded as the 7th seed and that I would pick Trinity.
Yeah, you really did call that one. I tell you what, but wow, what a shellacking Trinity put on North Catholic, though. Not that they won, but by the margin was my big surprise of the week.
Yeah, Trinity had multiple return touchdowns, though. You know, you see here, Andrew Durek had a punt return touchdown. Luke Laycock had a pick six. So anytime you can get those non-offensive scores, that really helps to kind of, balloon things a little bit too.
Yeah.
But congratulations to Trinity. Happy for them. And then Kiski got back to the playoffs, but got absolutely crushed by Thomas Jefferson. TJ plays 2 quarterbacks. Both of them threw multiple touchdown passes, and TJ had 2 wide receivers that also had multiple touchdown passes. And like each of them had catches from different quarterbacks. So it wasn't like one quarterback had one guy he liked to throw to. It was everybody was getting their share of the offense. So that brings us to this week where we've got Aliquippa against Latrobe, Mars against Central Valley, McKeesport against Trinity in a conference rematch, and then Montour taking on Thomas Jefferson. So there's some history there between those two teams as well. Aliquippa against Latrobe. This is only the second time they've met in the playoffs. Aliquippa won back in 1984. Aliquippa has probably the most impressive streak in the WPIAL. Is 15 straight championship games they've reached. That stretches back all the way to 2008 when they were playing in AA under the 4 classifications. So they made AA championship games. Then they were playing in 3A for the start of the 6 classification era. Then they got forced up into 4A, and they're still making title games. So 15 straight years for Aliquippa. To get to the WPIAL championship game is just incredible. 16 straight semifinals. They're the 2-time defending WPIAL champs. So it's been a great year for Latrobe, a great story for their program to, win another playoff game and take that next step forward. They've got some really talented kids there. Their running back linebacker, Alex Tash, is starting to get some Division I interest as a linebacker. They've got a talented receiver, but Aliquippa is just absolutely loaded with the talent they have all over the field, both on offense and defense. Tyke Hayes at running back, and a couple weeks ago, John Tracy, their backup running back, had 5 touchdowns 5 different ways. Quentin Good, their quarterback, is now the school all-time leader in passing yards. Brandon Banks, their receiver cornerback, is going to Yale, who's the first kid from Aliquippa to go to an Ivy League school since like the 1980s. And then Cam Lindsay, linebacker. I mean, I can just keep
pretty
going.
Special group.
It's an absolutely special group. The Walker kids, Harrison Walker and DeMarcus Walker. I mean, Aliquippa is loaded. The thing I think this year about Aliquippa that's different about Aliquippa from the past couple of years is that the last couple of years they had some big dudes on the line, and a lot of those kids up front have graduated. This year's team has all the talent in the world at the skill positions, but they're not quite as big on the offensive line. And I think they're definitely, as we've seen, good enough to run through pretty much most of the WPIAL teams that they'll face. But once they get into the state playoffs, it was their line that really carried them the last couple of years all the way to, the state finals and winning that state championship 2 years ago. So we'll see if their skill position players can be the ones to shoulder the load this year with a line that's not quite as big. Still an incredibly talented team. I'm not trying to take anything away from them. Just comparing them to years past, those massive dudes they had up front pretty much all graduated. And the kids they have
And
now are talented. It's just they're
right,
not, they're not averaging being bigger than the Steelers offensive line anymore.
right. Well, just McDevitt is in the same boat as Aliquippa, and I don't mean to jump ahead, through the thing, but I think that the issue is you talked about as you get, as we go through this process, that physicality that they used to have as you go through with all these talented teams. I mean, that wears on you week after week after week. And so I think that that's going to be the interesting thing to see with Aliquippa this year, as you touched on, is how on a physical level they can compete on a state, as they go through the WPIAL and then go into possibly the state tournament with that type of physicality this year. That might be a little bit different for them. So,
and as we've seen, as we know, Aliquip is never going to back down from everybody, from anybody. They're going to give everybody. Sorry, let me say that again. Fighting off a cold. I'm sorry. I'm sucking down cough drops, drinking tea. I'm doing my best here. I'm just a guy with a YouTube
you're playing
show,
hurt,
but,
man. Just like
yeah,
about half the guys out on the field.
yeah. Let me try this again. Sorry. Okay. Aliquippa is never going to back down from anybody. They will give everybody the best shot that they possibly have. But being a 1A size school that is forced to play in 4A by the state, I think you're right about that attrition that week after week it wears on you, just because they don't necessarily have the depth either. They don't have kids that are playing, just one side of the ball. Their kids are out there playing every down on both sides of the ball. So I think that attrition definitely, may start to show the further we get into it. But this is an incredibly talented group. And like I said, not to take anything away from the kids up front this year, they just don't quite have the size that the kids last year had. But I'd put this skill position group at Aliquippa, I'd put them up against anybody in the WPIAL just to see them play. Like if this was a statewide 7-on-7 tournament, I would take Aliquippa against any school. I don't care what classification, St. Joe's Prep, Central Catholic, whatever. I'm taking Aliquippa. But it's not a 7-on-7 tournament. You got to play on the lines as well. So we'll see how it goes.
Physicality that you have to deal with.
Yeah. A really great coaching matchup in the 4-5 game between Mars and Central Valley. Obviously, Coach Kasperowitz at Mars, Coach Casper. Yeah, Coach Casper. Been a longtime friend of the show. Been on a few times now.
And Coach Lyons too.
And Coach Lyons has also been on a few times. Yeah, we also a friend of the show. Central Valley's been to 4 straight WPIAL finals from their days in 3A, now up into 4A, and really a potential Central Valley Aliquippa semifinal showdown would just be an outstanding game. I mean, that would be a game worthy of a WPIAL championship game happening in the semifinals. But don't sleep on Mars either. They have an offense that can really put up points between their running game and their passing game. To go back a few slides here, Evan Wright scored 4 touchdowns on the ground. Luke Goodworth has thrown for a ton of yards and a ton of touchdowns this season. So Mars can score, but I like Central Valley in this game. I think their defense is better, and they've got 4 or 5 different guys that can really run the ball very well for that Central Valley team. Speaking of running the ball, go ahead.
No, but look, I personally think that Central Valley's under a little pressure here this year. I mean, here's a 2-time defending 3A champ. They, because of enrollment or whatever like that, they get moved up to 4A.
I think it was the success formula that moved them up, but yeah.
I thought it was an enrollment. It wasn't success formula. So I think that there's a little pressure here for them to kind of succeed in the bigger classification this year. Just my perception, but it's tough to when you move up like that. That's a pretty lofty, a big ring that you're reaching for. And I think Central Valley under a little pressure maybe to get beyond Aliquippa this year, but that's just my take.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think Central Valley wins this game this week, but that potential semifinal showdown with Aliquippa looms large. And Central Valley gave Aliquippa everything they could handle
Mm-hmm.
a few weeks ago. The Quips pulled away from them late in the second half to beat them by 10. But that was a tight game. And as we've talked about on the show a lot, it's hard to beat a team twice in the same year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So another conference rematch between McKeesport and Trinity. McKeesport won pretty handily earlier this year, 35-7. But when we talked with Trinity's coach, Dan Knaus, you can go back and listen to that interview. That was after Trinity beat Thomas Jefferson. He talked about that McKeesport game really hinged on a few plays and I think he said like a 4 or 5 minute span where the wheels kind of came off for them. But for the rest of the game, they kind of fought them tooth and nail and neck. But McKeesport's reached the semis in 6 of the last 9 years, and it's been 37 years since Trinity reached the semifinals. So
Yeah.
this is a big game for Trinity. I mean, I would argue them winning a playoff game for the first time since 2007 this season's already a huge success for them. McKeesport, I think, is capable of challenging Aliquippa for the WPIAL title. Coming into the year, I said it was Aliquippa and TJ, and we'll see what happens if TJ and McKeesport play again next week, although Montour might have something to say about that. But I think McKeesport, the way they can run the ball with Anthony Boyd and Keith Spell and Keemon Spell, they've got a bunch of guys with that triple option that's just so hard to stop. And they've got some dudes up front in the trenches too. That McKeesport's playing very, very well right now. Their only loss this year is to Bell Vernon, who's the defending 3A state champs. So I think it was by 1 point in overtime. McKeesport went for a 2-point conversion and didn't make it. So like they basically played them even. For that one. And then Montour against Thomas Jefferson. There is some history between these two. They've met twice before for WPIAL championship games, but TJ has never lost to Montour in the playoffs. And TJ has reached the semifinals in 24 out of the last 25 years, which, I said Aliquippa's 15 straight finals is the most impressive streak in the WPIAL. This is a pretty close second because getting to the semifinals in 24 out of 25 years is just an insane run of success for Coach Turpak at Thomas Jefferson.
Well, this is my upset special this week. I think that Montour may do it. Let's just say if they're going to do it, I think that they're going to have to do it this year. And sometimes that provides you a sense of urgency, and that. So that Montour over TJ, that might be my upset special.
Yeah. And Montour is technically the higher seeded team here. They are the number 3 seed and TJ is the number 6 seed. But I think when you look historically that Montour is, has never beaten TJ in the playoffs. So
exactly that at some point the streak's got to end.
That's true. That's true. All right, looking statewide, the WPIAL teams are up here in the top left corner of the bracket. The WPIAL champion won't enter the state bracket until the semifinals, so we're only in the quarterfinals at the WPIAL level here. And then the WPIAL champion will face someone from either District 4, where there's a couple there. It's a big week in District 4, and I think we're going to talk a lot about this. But District 4, there's an Allentown Central Catholic team that Aliquippa had to play in the semifinals last year. That's a pretty good team this year, along with a couple other good ones kind of looming here on their side of the bracket for a potential semifinal matchup. And then the other side is District 3, which is your neck of the woods, along with the District 1, District 12 group.
Pope John Paul II. I mean, just gonna be a tough out. Gonna be a tough out. Every single one of these 4A programs that are in the Penn Live and WPIAL Blitz Show rankings are just gonna be tough outs. And we talked, clearly about 4A being like the classification of Pennsylvania because it's it's boundary, non-boundary, it's areas from all over the state, 11, 3, 7, 4, 1. I mean, it is the full scope of football in the state of Pennsylvania. And I'll tell you what, there's so much talent here, but Bishop McDevitt, Aliquippa, it's really hard to get away from those two for a possible rematch, or basically for the for the best 2 out of 3.
The
Here.
rubber match, I think
The
it is.
rubber match,
Yeah.
sure, the rubber match there in the state championship game and what have you. And yeah, I already had Bishop McDevitt people asking me about what's Aliquippa like this year already. So
Well, you can tell them to watch the show because we
I
talk about them
do.
every week. Yeah.
I do. That's why they ask me.
So in my statewide rankings, this is once again one of those, one team played, one team didn't. That Allentown Central Catholic played and Bishop McDevitt didn't. So Allentown retook the top spot in the rankings. The big one to me here, though, this week, I mentioned District 4, Selinsgrove taking on Jersey Shore in what I think is the District 4 championship game.
Yeah.
So they played to a game that got called early because of a really nasty injury situation. So that game was called and ended
It's
up
a
being a
tie.
tie.
Man.
So they tied technically earlier this year. But to me, that's the big one in 4A statewide this week is that game between Selinsgrove and Jersey Shore.
Yeah, and you can see, I mean, this just shows the depth of the 4A classification across the state because, most of the top 10 teams are playing teams that are, within the top 25.
Mm-hmm.
So it just shows you the depth of the classification. But yeah, so much um, is going to be determined this week because, as you touched on, a lot of these teams had off. Manheim Central against number 23 Susquehanna Township here in District 3. That's really going to be a battle as well. I've got my eye on that. And our friends at Twin Valley, I'll tell you what, here from Berks County area, they're just flying underneath the radar, but quite a talented group of kids at the Twin Valley there too. But for me, the one, and it's hard to imagine that they're flying under the radar, is Pope John Paul II. That is a very talented group from top to bottom there coming out of uh, District 1. They don't get a lot of the love because there aren't that many 4A teams there. But that's where they like gain all of their experience because they're having to play all these big schools. And we talked about physicality. Pope John Paul II's got it because they've had to play up against bigger teams all season long.
Yep. Yeah. And that Montour TJ game is technically a top 10 matchup by my rankings. TJ beating Kiski and moving up into the top 10. East Pennsboro was in the top 10 last week, but had a bye week. So once again, that's one of those, because my rankings are based on numbers, statistics, and math, that when you play, it benefits you more than having a week off.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't take into account buys, nor should it.
Right. That being said, 19-2 in the round 1 playoff games for my rankings. So as you can see overall as we go through these, they have been pretty good predictors of who's going to win. We'll keep an eye on that moving through the playoffs. But since I just came up with this like 3 weeks ago, I'm really enjoying kind of testing it out. All right, on to 3A, where in the WPIAL, the top 4 teams got buys. Southmoreland and Deer Lakes, neither of them had ever won a playoff game coming into this one. Deer Lakes obviously winning their first playoff game in school history. Derek Burk, the quarterback, 4 total touchdowns. Zach Grant, the wide receiver, with 3 receiving touchdowns. The upset of the week in the WPIAL, though, was South Park beating Knock. Did it on the ground and just kind of ran all over Knock, never let Knock's passing game get in rhythm. So South Park moving on to take on East Allegheny. And then Beaver thumping Shady Side Academy. Beaver is the highest scoring team in 3A. So that'll be an interesting game they have against Avonworth. And then West Mifflin, freshman running back Armand Hill, I think now is over 1,200 yards and probably close to 20-ish touchdowns in the last 4 weeks after they plugged him into the lineup. So this West Mifflin team is very, very different than the West Mifflin team that we saw early in the season, now that they have Armand Hill running the ball for them, which should set up some pretty good quarterfinal matchups. We've got Deer Lakes heading to the beach at Bell Vernon to take on the defending WPIAL champions. South Park against East Allegheny. in a rematch of a week 0 game, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Avonworth and Beaver in a conference rematch from the Western Hills Conference. And then Elizabeth Forward and West Mifflin also played earlier this season. So a lot of rematches happening here. So we'll talk about these. Bell Vernon playing Deer Lakes for the first time ever in the playoffs. Bell Vernon's reached the semis in 6 straight years, looking to get there for a 7th consecutive year. And really, Bell Vernon being the defending WPIAL and 3A state champs, they've got their sights set on getting to and winning another state championship game before they have to move up to 4A next year. And they've got an incredibly talented running back in Quentin Martin, who's going to Penn State, along with a slew of other talented players. But they're going to have some challenges before everything's said and done in the WPIAL, because obviously Deer Lakes, coming off that first playoff win, is kind of playing with house money right now. They've got nothing to lose. East Allegheny and South Park, as you can see, it's been a while since either of them have been to the semis. South Park was there in 2019, but that was their only trip to the semis since their 2005 WPIAL championship. East Allegheny hasn't been to the semis since 92. But on the bottom half of the bracket, Avonworth is outstanding. Beaver is very good and gave Avonworth everything they could handle in a 5-point loss earlier this year. And then Elizabeth Forward and West Mifflin are both good teams. Yeah, Elizabeth Forward beat West Mifflin 24-7 back in week 1, but West Mifflin with this rushing attack with, a freshman running back they plugged in just a few weeks ago, that's a completely different animal. So I would not at all be surprised if West Mifflin came out and beat Elizabeth Forward, and anything can happen in that Avonworth Beaver game. So there's the bottom half of this bracket is really interesting. I think it's wide open that any of these 4 teams could take it.
Yeah, and how many times have we seen this throughout the season where basically teams reinvent themselves and catch fire. I mean, it really, this trend started last year in the playoffs, and it's just continued on this year that kudos to these teams that aren't so hung up on a philosophy or whatever, that they can't decide to do what they think is going to get them to the next level, in this in the postseason. So I'm really anxious to see what West Mifflin does as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking statewide, the WPIAL down here on the bottom left area of the bracket, the champion will enter at the state semifinals, and will play someone mostly from the western part of the state, whether it's District 10, the northwestern Pennsylvania Erie-ish area, or the District 5, 6, 9 area, which is kind of the middle part of the state. So 3A is really where you start to get into a true east and west like halves of the bracket, I think. Even 4A somewhat, but really in 3A, because
3A, yeah, for sure.
4A you still have like District 11, which is like the coal region, being on the western side, quote unquote. But this is where you start to see the divide. But there's some good teams out your way too. Wyomissing's been good. Newman Goretti obviously made it to the state championship game last year. Danville's looking strong. Couple good teams out of District 11. So there's a lot of good teams here that are going to be playing their way through the bracket in the coming weeks.
Totally wide open, I think, this year. And the reason it's wide open is because you have a lot of really good teams. Obviously Avonworth and Bell Vernon, Wyomissing, Goretti, man, I mean, and Danville, out of District 4, Northwest Lehigh, Palmerton. I mean, incredible depth in the 3A classification throughout the state of Pennsylvania. So, yeah, really interested to see how it all shakes out. You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. So I'm fighting off this head cold.
I know, and you looked like you good. Lost your headset or something.
No,
I don't know.
I'm good. All right. So on my statewide rankings here, Avonworth slid up a little bit. Bell Vernon moved down, and even though they both had bye weeks, because I'm studying how the math of this all works, I think it's because going back to the very beginning of the show, we talked about the teams from the Western Hills Conference went undefeated in the first round of the playoffs. So that was West Mifflin 1, South Park 1, and Beaver 1. So those were Avonworth's conference opponents who they beat this year. Whereas Bell Vernon, the teams that they beat, Southmoreland and Mount Pleasant, their conference their fellow conference teams all lost this week. So I think that, and as we can see, the difference in the rating here is by like 0.3 of a point. So it's
Yeah,
fractional, but I think it's that quality of victory metric there that slid Avonworth ahead of Bell Vernon because the teams that they had beaten did better this past week. So
sure.
these rankings are always in flux, but nevertheless, the top 10 stayed the same from last week, and overall in the 24 first round games statewide, the teams that were ranked higher in my rankings were 20-4. So overall, pretty good once again.
Tooting the old horn there, as you
Uh,
should.
yeah, I like to see that it's working, right?
Sure.
And yeah, it's an ongoing test that I'm doing very publicly here with these rankings.
No,
So
but it makes sense.
yeah. All right, on to 2A, where the top two teams got buys in the bracket. So there were 6 first round games. So we'll talk about the two halves of the bracket. In a battle of two of the top passers in the WPIAL, Western Beaver and freshman quarterback Javen Peel surpassed Sarah Catholic. And then Amani Christian ran all over Waynesburg, and Mohawk was all over Burl in multiple phases of that game between Jay Rona throwing the ball and Justin Boston running the ball.
Yeah.
On the bottom half of the bracket, minor upset with Beaver Falls topping Keystone Oaks, although I seem to recall saying earlier this year that Beaver Falls had, at the time, lost all their games by less than 10 points. They lost their season finale to Western Beaver by 20. But other than that, they lost a lot of close games this year. So I'm not surprised to see Beaver Falls making a little bit of a run here in the playoffs and winning a game just because of their tradition of having made the WPIAL finals every year since moving down to 2A. And they played in a number of close games this year. Washington just thumped Elwood City, and then McGuffey handled Derry pretty well. Although Derry, who went winless last year, congratulations on just getting into the
Yeah,
playoffs
just
this
getting
year.
into the playoffs. Yeah, I mean it's a process. We say that all the time, but you have to, put one foot in front of the other. And, obviously getting to the postseason is the first step in coming back from something like that.
Yep, absolutely. So looking at the bracket overall, we've got Steel Valley against Western Beaver, Amani Christian against Mohawk, Neshannock in a conference rematch against Beaver Falls, and then Washington in a conference rematch against McGuffey in the bottom half of the bracket. So the top half, I think Steel Valley and Amani Christian are both teams capable of winning the WPIAL title, and they potentially could play in a semifinal next week. Their conference opponents, they played to a 12-7 game earlier this year that Steel Valley won. Steel Valley is the defending WPIAL champions. They've been to the finals in 4 out of the last 7 years. Western Beaver hasn't been to the semifinals since 1995. But with that freshman quarterback, you never know. They could go out, just throw the ball all over the yard, and Steel Valley likes to run the ball. So if you get them behind by a couple scores early, you never know what might happen. On the next game down, Mohawk, it's been great for them. They won their 4th playoff game in school history. They've never reached the semifinals. But I think the talent that Amani Christian has, the size they have up front in the trenches, and the skill position players they have, I think Amani's just better. And I think we're going to get an Amani Steel Valley rematch in the semis here.
I would totally agree with you. I think both of those teams clearly, should move on.
Yep. And then on the bottom half, I mean, these are two really compelling matchups to me because Neshannock beat Beaver Falls by a point in overtime earlier this year, 27-26. Both teams were in the semis last year. Beaver Falls has reached the WPIAL finals in 3 straight years. I don't know. Neshannock's playing really well. They've got that veteran offensive line, but Beaver Falls in the playoffs is not a team that you should bet against. And it was only 1 point in overtime earlier this year. So this one could go either way.
Totally a toss-up.
Yeah, and then Washington and McGuffey, they're conference rivals. They've kind of gone back and forth the last couple of years. Washington beat them 13-7 in week 9. So, I mean, they have recent experience with each other, like just last week, that they played a pretty close game. So we'll see. I mean, Washington historically has had a lot more success in the playoffs than McGuffey, but I mean, this is kind of McGuffey's big chance to slay the beast of their conference rival that's kind of, had their number for so many years. And they're relatively close school districts. Actually, a couple of kids from Washington transferred to McGuffey this year. So there's a lot on the line on the field and just bragging rights wise in this game. This is going to be a very emotional game between Washington and McGuffey.
Yeah, that's the story behind the story, I think, is this game and all the backstories between these two programs. But I think Washington has really had a solid year. Hard to pick against them, but as you pointed out, I think that one could go either way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really kind of like with the 3A bracket, the bottom half here could go to any of these four teams. I mean,
Yeah.
considering both of these are rematches of conference games that were one-score games earlier this year, you just never know. Okay, on to the statewide bracket where the WPIAL champion will enter at the semifinal level once again. And they will play someone out of either District 10, probably, well, maybe District 10, we'll see. District 10, which is the northwestern PA area. District 9's on our half of the bracket, as well as District 5 and 8, which is Westinghouse out of the Pittsburgh City League, who made it all the way to the state championship game last year, has an absolutely outstanding team, but so does Farrell out of District 10. And potentially we could have a Westinghouse Farrell quarterfinal matchup for the right to play the WPIAL champion in the semifinals, which that's just going to be a knockdown, drag out slugfest there in those two quarterfinals.
Yeah, and what can you say about the 2A classification? I mean, they're just major heavyweights everywhere you turn. And granted, it is rooted in the WPIAL and across the upper tier of Pennsylvania. But wow, what a lot of great football being played across the state in 2A this year. This week I'll be broadcasting the District 3 2A final for two teams, not appearing on this list. Trinity, who was the state semifinalist last year, and Camp Hill. So I'm looking forward to that game this week for Penn Live.
And as we've talked about, with it being a big week in District 4, I believe that Southern Columbia plays Mount Carmel this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a battle of heavyweights, and that's for the semifinal, not the district championship. So because Troy's in the bottom part of that bracket. So holy cow! I mean, District 4, wow, just a war of attrition there to get through the district just to get into the PIAA.
Yep. And looking at my statewide rankings, I have those three District 4 teams that we just mentioned, three of them in the top four of the rankings, just because the math likes them that much. I mean, they've been that good so far this year. Farrell's the other one, and Westinghouse, and those five are all ranked above any of the WPIAL teams. So it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of all plays out, but a lot of big time matchups. Obviously, my number one, Southern Columbia, against number 4, Mount Carmel this week. But even, Troy at number 3 against Line Mountain in the other District 4 semifinal. They're a top 15 team. McGuffey's a top 15 team in the rankings. So there's a lot still to be decided. And Central Clarion out of District 9 might have the best scoring margin of any team. Like, did you see what their scoring margin is this year? It's insane. It's like 500 something to like 50.
Well, I think that had a lot to do. That's a function of their schedule. Look, you have to play your schedule. You got to play them. But yeah, clearly, yeah, sometimes those numbers can get skewed, obviously. And let's see, from this week, how they do against Brookville.
Yeah. Yep. We'll see how it gets, when they move into the statewide bracket, although
Right.
I think they've got a looming game against Westinghouse in a couple weeks that could,
Yeah.
determine how their season goes. 2A was probably the least good that my rankings did overall.
Oh, 17-6.
17
Wow.
and 6. Yeah, but still, fairly respectable overall. If you were just picking games and said, "Oh, I went 17-6 this week," you'd feel pretty good about yourself. So,
I think so.
I pretty happy with that, but not quite as good as the 23-1 we had in one of the other ones.
Anybody going 17-6 on DraftKings? I mean, I think
It's true. We don't endorse gambling on high school
we
sports,
would
but
not no, but so anyway, all right.
All right. So on to 1A, where we had a full 16-team bracket. No real upsets here on the top half. Southside Beaver, the number 1 seed, just cruising past Monessen. Greensburg Central Catholic getting their first playoff win since 2011, which is a little bit of a surprise given the history that school has. But first win in over a decade for them. Clairton rolling past Laurel, and then Union with Braylon Thomas, who was our player of the week, putting up 7 touchdowns to beat Burgettstown. I guess I should say 7 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion to beat Burgettstown. So
wow.
On the bottom half, Fort Cherry and Matt Seg. Oh my, I spelled his name wrong. Okay. That was a little typo on my part. But when you put 40 slides together, you're going to have a typo every now and then. I apologize. Spelled Matt Seg's name wrong. That should be a G
I
on
think the
end.
fans of the show will definitely give you some grace on that one.
Hopefully. The big one this week, Rochester somewhat upsetting Cornell in a 10-7 game. Cornell missed an extra point in overtime, then Rochester scored and made the extra point to win the game. So congratulations to Rochester. Their running back Dom Guido had 2 rushing touchdowns. Bishop Canavan all over Leechburg, and then California in their running game getting a win for the Tri-County South by thumping Jeanette 44-6. Great performance for the Trojans there. So looking at the bracket, we've got Southside Beaver against Greensburg Central Catholic, Clairton against Union, Fort Cherry against Rochester, Bishop Canavan against California, and my oh my, are these some good matchups, because this is just absolutely loaded with all of these teams. Any one of these teams, and we've talked about this all year, that there were probably 7 or 8 teams in 1A capable of making a run to the championship game. And, there's a lot of history here between these teams, Union being the defending champs, Clairton, being the behemoth that they are, Bishop Canavan having been to the last 2 championship games. And Fort Cherry and Rochester, there's some history there that they've played for WPIAL championship games. They've met in the playoffs before. So just a lot on the line here as we move forward. And there's going to be some really good teams that get knocked out this week in 1A just because of, how the bracket falls.
Well, eventually good teams, there are good teams that get knocked out. I mean, as you go along.
Yep. And Fort Cherry lost to Rochester in the semis last year. Or not semi, sorry, the quarterfinals. They lost at this point last year to Rochester. And if you remember back to, I think it was the first year of the show when we interviewed Tanner Gary, Fort Cherry's head coach, that, he's coaching in the stadium named after his grandfather. His father coached there. Fort Cherry lost to Rochester in a WPIAL championship game. And those Rochester games are always very meaningful. I think we actually interviewed them after they beat Rochester that year. So a lot on the line there between 2 schools that have a history together of Fort Cherry and Rochester too.
Yeah. And, as we've gone through the bracket here too, I've just still found it very interesting that, the WPIAL still go one of the few districts in the state that still is devoted to the neutral sites for the games. And I think that lends itself to good competition. Not that I don't like other districts using home field advantage, but they have to do it in the WPIAL this way because they don't have power rankings. So it's tough to say, who gets obviously the higher seeded team then. So
yeah, and what the WPIAL has always done is, your first playoff game is played at the home field of the better
higher
seeded team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But then after that, everything's at neutral sites. So, going back to like the brackets where teams got buys, like 3A, where there were 4 teams that got buys, those quarterfinal games are all home field games for those teams that got buys, because obviously it's their first game, so they get the home field game. But here in 1A, these are all neutral site games because the teams got their their home playoff games all in the first round. So
Yep.
it is kind of cool though that, to have these neutral site games. Theoretically, they usually try and schedule them like about equidistant between the two schools, but I always like kind of pulling out a map and trying to figure out where they're going to be,
Well,
before they're
remember
announced.
too, I mean, it isn't necessarily, it's like who can host the game too.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the difficult part about
Yeah.
neutral site situations is that the schools have to want to. They can't be forced into, oh, you're like the most equidistant school. You have to host this game. No, I mean, schools have to volunteer. At least I think in the
Yeah,
WPIAL as well. Schools
they
have to
do.
volunteer their facilities.
Yep, they do. They do. And the other hard thing too is that some of these schools are still in the playoffs, right? So
Right.
like Peters
Sure.
Township is hosting a game, but they're playing a 5A
Yeah,
semifinal the same night. So
that's a tough one because a lot of the same people that work the game will want to watch the game on the road. So
yep,
that's a tough one.
yep. Yeah, so it's always interesting to see kind of where these games get placed. The other thing the WPIAL does is after the first round, when you have the home games, all the games they put on sites with artificial surfaces, so with field turf, and then they play their championship games at Acrisure Stadium, which has some of the worst turf in Western Pennsylvania. But I
Yeah.
digress. Um, so onto the statewide bracket, where pretty good distribution of schools here. The WPIAL, obviously in the bottom left hand side of the bracket here, the champion will enter at the semifinal level. We'll play either the District 10 or District 9 champion from the northern part of the state, and then the rest of the bracket's filled in by pretty much the eastern half. Although it's interesting what's defined as east when you have in the 5 and 6A classifications, like District 3, the Harrisburg area counts as East. And then here in 1A, you've got like District 5 and District 6, like the Somerset and Altoona areas, which count as East. So,
Yeah.
the line kind of shifts depending on where the balance of schools are. But nevertheless, there's a lot of good teams kind of out there. Steele's on High Spire, the defending state champs are looking very strong once again.
Yeah, they sure are. And this is where always, I think the first couple of weeks there when Steel High moves into the state tournament is how you're going to gauge, what kind of team that they've got. But they've got a pretty strong team. In the Blitz rankings there, Canton, they actually got waxed pretty good by Troy just a couple of weeks ago. So I'm interested to see how they perform. But Fort Cherry, I mean, they've been on the top of my list, all season. They've shown that they're a team that on a statewide level could be a force. But whoever comes out of the WPIAL in 1A is going to be a force. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen it, the last few years with Union and Bishop Canevin and even Jeanette before that making it all the way to the state championship game. Or no, Bishop Canevin didn't. Sorry, they lost to Red Bank Valley out of District 9. But we've had some success of getting teams to the state championship game. Haven't won one in a few years here in 1A. But we'll see. We'll see what happens
We'll
this
see what
year.
happens. That's
Yep.
why we play it out.
And no changes overall in my statewide rankings, other than Union dropping from 10 to 11 and Greensburg Central Catholic sliding up to take their place. So just a little flip of the WPIAL schools there. But a big matchup rankings wise between Canton and South Williamsport in District 4 this week. Another big District 4 matchup in my
Yeah,
rankings.
wow. District 4 is where it's at this week.
It really is. And higher ranked teams 22-4 in the first round of the 1A playoffs. So overall, my rankings did pretty well the first round, and we'll see. We'll keep an eye on them as we move forward. So, thanks to everyone who tuned in tonight. We really appreciate Tim Burk from Deer Lakes coming on to talk about their first playoff victory in school history. And if you enjoy listening to us talk about high school football and want to hear us talk about other things, you can tune into some of our other podcasts that we're on. So I'm on the Steel City Blitz podcast, which is a Steelers podcast. We air on Thursday nights, usually around 10 or so, live on YouTube, and then also available on any podcast streaming app. And then Bruce has his Fresh Set of Downs show, which he'll talk about.
Yeah, fresh set of downs. Actually, we're gonna do it Wednesday this week with all of the state tournament action going on Tuesdays. I decided to move it to Wednesdays here for the next couple of weeks, and looking forward to talking, all of the recap some of the Eastern games, look ahead, talk some Penn State football too. I tell you what, the Penn State talk is really heating up, and between Coach Franklin and getting ready for Michigan this week, so much to talk about with Penn State football, along with high school football. That's Fresh Set of Downs Wednesday at 7:30 here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification button so that when we do go live, on or about 9:15 for the Blitz show, and then the traveling road show, which is a Fresh Set of Downs because of conflicts with Phillies postseason baseball and other statewide tournaments like soccer, field hockey, and volleyball. Fresh Set of Downs kind of moves around, but if you subscribe to the Sports Stream Premium YouTube channel and hit that alarm button so that you're notified when we go live, you never miss anything, and that's what I'd suggest.
Yes, and we certainly thank the Sports Stream Premium channel for hosting our show throughout this year and the other years as well. If you ever want to go back and listen to any of those other interviews that we've done, they're all there. So I mentioned on the show a lot about the great guests we've had in the past, from Coach Warfield from Aliquippa last year when we had both him and Coach Lyons on the same week. That was awesome. And yeah, it's been great. We've been really blessed to have.
Well, that's how I got
everybody.
to meet Bob Palco. I mean, Bob, I tweeted out the fact that, I ran into Bob Palco now, who's working for Penn State, in the football program as, liaison. I don't know exactly what his job title is, but, our eyes met. God, the guy's always got a great smile, and very pleased to see him. I mean, it's a special year for him going into the High School Hall of Fame. And for me to see Bob and to have the fact that I'm on a first name basis with a man like Bob Palco, I tell you, it's pretty special to me. But to see him on the sideline there at the Penn State game, that was a lot of fun. We had a lot of great memories. Every time, we don't have to talk much, we just shake our hand, we just say hello. But when you have those meetings like that with these men, all the great memories just come rolling out, and of the times that you've been together previously, and that just is worth its weight in gold to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been so cool to be able to meet, all these guys, be able to tell all these stories that we've been able to tell over the years on this show, this year and other years. And I think one of the things stories we've told this year is kind of the community impact of what happens with football too, right? That from having Mayor Walker from Aliquippa on earlier this year, talking about opening their new stadium, the superintendent from Jefferson Morgan last week. We had James Dotson from the Lawrence County Sports Network talking about everything that went on in Lawrence County this year with all their teams that were in contention for playoff games and conference titles and all that. And even this week with Coach Burk from Deer Lakes talking about how the basketball program led into, success with the football program, and the community celebration of, how after the game, their players will go celebrate with the band and the cheerleaders. And, I was in band in high school, and like the football players wanted nothing to do with us. So like when I hear like, oh, they involved other people, I'm like, this is so cool, So yeah, it's great. And it's so cool to be able to tell these stories and just kind of follow everything along. And, it's been great doing the show. I've had so much fun.
Football it's so much more than players and coaches, and I think that's what I'm so proud of this show, is that it goes beyond just players and coaches. And like I said, it's community, it's the WPIAL steering committee, it's so much more. And I can tell you what, there aren't any other football shows in the state of Pennsylvania that are bringing on mayors and steering committee members and what have you. I guess we're gonna have to get somebody from the PIAA next. I mean,
I don't know if they'd come on a show with me after how I've spoken about them in the past.
Yeah, I don't know if they'd come on the show, but we're always thankful for our guests, and we're always thankful to our fans who, gosh, we just had, tell you what, we had a chat session going here this week like we haven't had. And as I mentioned a couple times, that's the whole reason why we do the show live on YouTube now rather than kind of recorded and uploaded, is so that we can involve the fans and kind of take the show to the next level each year. It's we try and keep moving the show forward. I mean, that's just with life, that's just with football. You just got to keep trying to get better every day, and that's what we're trying to do with every show, right, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely. And doing it live's been a lot of fun. I know I'm kind of battling a head cold here and, chewing on cough drops and drinking tea, but we got through the show. I only had a couple little hiccups here and there. So we
Yeah.
we made it through, and hopefully next week my sinuses are all cleared up and we'll be good to go.
Well, I tell you what, it gets more exciting here now as the weeks progress. As the number of teams fall, the excitement gets much bigger. So as we move on to the WPIAL championships and then continue forward all the way to Cumberland Valley, the WPIAL Blitz show marches on. So for my buddy Ian McMeans, I'm Bruce Batchley. Thanks to all of our fans out there. We do the show for you guys. And thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week. Take care now. Bye-bye.